Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Imperfect Show. Jeremy and I are here this week to just talk about something that might be something that's on your mind, something that you might have a question about, something that you might be a little bit confused about, perhaps. Maybe some people are, I think, when it comes to this topic. And we're talking about marriage this week, what it takes to have a happy marriage. We were talking, not that maybe we necessarily have one.
Just model it after us.
But, this is something that is a little bit confusing, I think, for our society in general. People are seeking happiness. People are seeking fulfillment in their lives. And the statistics show that that's not really happening in the area of marriage. I think most recently the divorce rate is at 50%. It's kind of what is kind of going around, I think, that statistic. So that really is evidence that that area in people's life is not truly maybe happy or fulfilling for them. And so we just wanted to take a couple minutes and talk about what is the standard for marriage, what we have kind of experienced in our lives, what we've looked to as a standard for marriage, and what it might kind of look like to have a happy relationship in that way.
Yeah, like so many things, marriage is really a product of your perspective. How you define happiness, how you understand happiness will really lead you to a place of either deciding I have a happy marriage or not a happy marriage. It's interesting, before someone gets married, they just believe that, love is enough. They just love enough and they just try enough. And we have a child, I won't mention any names, but she's convinced that the object of her affection could never, ever do anything that would upset her. I mean, she's just said in that, it's a fact, she will not be moved off of that position. But for anyone who's been married, we know that's not true. You may love the person that you marry, but there's something about closeness and making decisions together and going through life together that sometimes brings out the best in us, but can also bring out the worst in us, and it can be a difficult situation. And then we look at that and we say, well, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I'm not happy. And we start to look for happiness and fulfillment outside of that relationship, either through other relationships. Susanne mentioned divorce is very high. That 50% number is what we're told. We don't really know. But you look at the numbers of people who are divorced that bring us to that 50%. Often it's people who are divorced multiple times over the course of their life. They just never find the one. And a lot of that is because the perspective on what it is to be happy and what makes a happy marriage is just skewed. There are times in every relationship where there's joy and excitement and emotional happiness, but there are other times where those things don't exist, but you can still be content and happy and fulfilled in that relationship. And really, that's what we want to talk about and just give some perspective, some thoughts on what that looks like and how you can get there.
And I do feel like, I kind of joked about it, but I do feel like we have a happy marriage. Yeah. I don't think that you can have that to be as your goal is to have a happy marriage. I think that you can, like Jeremy said, you can have a fulfilled relationship in that way when certain things are followed and when you keep certain things in mind, and when that person lets you down or disappoints you, there's some things that you need to keep in mind about that person, not expecting too much of them. I think expectations are a huge thing in marriage, and a lot of times what we would say is a happy marriage is when that person meets our expectations,
right,
when we meet that person's expectations, right, and then both people are happy. And so I feel like it really helps to define what that actually looks like. I think the goal can't be to have a happy marriage. I feel like it needs to be an inward focus on yourself being the person that you're supposed to be, and then looking at the other person in a healthy way as well, and having it be not just a one-sided relationship. Right. And so the goal can't really be to have a happy marriage.
So you'd say that happiness is really the product of understanding the process of what makes a right marriage. Maybe we could say it that way.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before when people talk about I want to have a godly marriage. That you shouldn't say I'm going to have a godly marriage. You should say I want to be a godly person.
Yeah.
And if you pursue God, then if two people in that relationship are pursuing God, what that produces is a godly marriage. And that would be the same here.
Yeah, I think so too. Yep.
And it's about the process. And I think this is where we miss it, from very early in dating and, however you view dating and courting and all those things. The process from, meeting each other, determining that you like each other, falling in love, and making a decision to get married, there should be something that happens in that process, and it really should be understanding what it means to have the right kind of relationship and what that process looks like. And right has to be defined, and this is very important, but right has to be defined by the Creator. So, again, we've used these illustrations before, but if you have something and you decide not to follow the manufacturer's instructions for that something, it may function, but it will never function the way that it was created or designed to function, not fully. And so when we talk about having a right marriage, we need to have a marriage that is right according to the designer, the creator of that marriage.
And you might be in a relationship where that person truly does not ever make you upset or hurts your feelings. I mean, that might be the case for you.
I guess that could be the case.
But,
I haven't met that person yet, but maybe it's possible.
It is important for both people, in that relationship to understand that, we might be happy people. We might have a good relationship.
Sure.
We might mesh together so well that we never step on each other's toes or anything. But there's still going to be some things that are going to malfunction if we don't follow the blueprint that has been designed for marriage.
Yeah. So what are some of those things? We could talk about this for a long time, but there's a couple things that we talked about that are really important. Remember, focusing on the process, focusing on the pieces that make a good marriage, not focusing on having a happy marriage, because that definition of happiness, it's so malleable depending on how we feel and what's going on in our lives. So what is the process? What do you need to have a happy marriage? The first thing is a right standard. We just mentioned this a little bit, but you have to have the right standard. Just a couple quick thoughts on this. If your standard is the relationship that your parents had, let's say they had a great marriage and that's the standard. We're going to do everything that they did. Well, they probably had some struggles you didn't know about, that you were unaware of, and some things they had to overcome that you don't see coming. And so if that's your standard, you're going to run into some situations that you can't deal with because your standard is not perfect. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who have decided, my parents, the other married people in my life that I knew growing up, their relationships were so horrible. I'm going to do it a completely different way. So I don't know what the right way is, but it's going to be the opposite of the way they did it. Well, again, your standard is skewed. So what is your standard? You could read books, and we read books, and books are important. They're helpful. You could go to seminars. You could do all of these things, and those things can be helpful, but you have to have the right standard that comes from, again, the Creator. You have to start in the right place.
This is really difficult to talk about, I think, because, like you were saying, for every person that, when you say right standard, it means something different. Yeah. Whether it is that you look at someone else's relationship and you want it to be like that. Well, maybe they did some things to make their relationship like that you can't do, or that you won't do, or that you don't believe in, but you just don't know that. And so it is really important to look at, first of all, what is the design for marriage? What is that all about, the blueprint for it? But then the standard that you're going to use when you get in an argument or a disagreement, or something with the kids that you need to figure out together. When maybe a tragedy comes into your family, what's the standard that you're going to go back to when you're not really sure what to do? And that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the standard we would talk about, of course, and if you're watching this show or listening to this, you may or may not agree with us, but you're at least probably aware of our position. We would say that the Bible is the standard. And again, we could spend a lot of time talking about that and why that is, and there's some great resources to break that down. But we believe that God is the Creator, and that of all of the things that He created, He also created marriage. In the very beginning, He created man and woman. He brought them together in union. That was the first marriage. Marriage is talked about throughout the Bible. It's talked about specifically in some places in the New Testament. Marriage, this relationship that we have here on earth, was created by God. So if He created it and He gives us the manual for how to operate within the context of what He created, then that should be the standard. There are a lot of other good things that we could read and listen to, and models that we could follow. But the standard is the set of instructions, if you will, given to us by the manufacturer, if I can call God the manufacturer. He designed it. He knows how it's supposed to work. He told us how to function within the context of not only that relationship, but life. And that needs to be our standard for everything. And if it's something else, we're going to have problems. It has to be a relationship that starts there. This is our standard. This is what we're going to follow.
You know what I think is so comforting about that is that we don't have to really figure it out on our own.
Yeah.
Is that there's already been kind of laid out for us what
Yeah.
it's supposed to look like, what we should do, how we should live our lives, how we should be a good, what kind of a spouse we should be,
Yeah.
how to be a wife that you're supposed to be, and the husband that you're supposed to be. You don't have to figure that out. And
Right.
when you look at the different kind of scenarios that you mentioned earlier about, when you see maybe this relationship that was modeled for you and you don't want it to be like that.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people say, I don't want it to be like that, but I don't know how to get it to not be like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know really what I want my relationship to look like or how to be the person I'm supposed to be so that my marriage will work and so that it will last and so that it will be fulfilling for both of us and that so that it will be what it's supposed to be. And so the Bible, I feel like that's why it's so comforting, because we don't have to figure it out. We don't
Right.
have to look at other people. We don't have to look at, other relationships that have been modeled for us, or even, television or movies. We don't have to look at those things because we already have it all lined out for us, and we don't really have to follow another person, but we can look to what God has outlined for us. And I think that's just brings such a great deal of comfort and peace to know we don't have to figure it out on our own.
It really should. And it's become popular now, maybe always, to say, well, the Bible is archaic, it's outdated. What the Bible talks about is no longer relevant in culture and those kind of things. And if that's your position, there's probably not much that we can do to help you. You have to put your faith, your confidence in something. And so you're either putting your faith and your confidence in something which is modern, which is now, which is culture, which culture says is okay, it's relevant. But the problem with that, and I don't think we have to convince anyone of this, is that culture and those standards are constantly changing. I mean, from one day to the next. Today's hero is tomorrow's villain. I mean, it's crazy. And we see this unfolding every day in our culture right now. So if that's your standard, then you're never going to figure this thing out. You're always going to be running after something that is consistently changing based on who has the loudest voice in the room. And so when we look to the Bible, again, I can't convince you if you have already decided you're not going to follow that standard. But when we look to the Bible, we're saying this is set. It is established. It has been given to us by God. We don't have to figure it out. We just need to learn how to apply it to this relationship. So you have to have the right standard. And I think that's so important. If you get everything else wrong, just do that and you're going to be okay. The second part is connected to that. And this is where a lot of people start to get really uncomfortable. You need to have the right standard. And you also need to fulfill the right roles. And the Bible outlines those roles for us. It helps us to understand how we're to interact with each other as husband and wife, who is to be responsible for what happens in the relationship and how that interaction takes place. The Bible talks about this. And again, I know this is not always popular. And if you disagree with biblical roles of man and woman, of husband and wife, then you're going to struggle here. But again, you can take something that you purchase and do whatever you want with it. But if you don't do what the manufacturer intended, then it will never be fully what it was created to be. Now, real simple word on roles. And we've done a video, I think, even talking about roles in marriage. Roles in marriage are not an assignment of importance or value. When the Bible talks about these things, that is not the purpose. Roles in marriage are simply for the purpose of causing that relationship to function the way that it's supposed to function, to allow two people with different backgrounds and different minds and different emotions and different outlooks to move forward together in concert as a husband and wife should, because they understand their roles. We talk about the husband as the head of the family, and people get real weird about that. It simply means that that person has been designated by God to be responsible for what happens in the family, not to be a dictator or lord over everyone or make every decision, but to simply be responsible for what takes place in the family. So in order for a relationship, a marriage relationship, to work the way that the Creator designed for it to work, we need to know and function within our God-given roles. Again, I know it's not popular, but
No.
it's just a reality. That's how it must work.
And I think it's not popular because people don't really understand.
They don't understand
what it means.
Right?
We could talk about this for a really, really long time,
Yeah.
but I feel like the woman's role in marriage is so often misunderstood, and it's really difficult to talk to kind of the upcoming generation about what about submission, what that looks like, what is that was intended to be by God, what the role of a wife is, what it means to be your husband's helper. There's all these things that are involved in these words that we get so caught up in. And I think that it's not popular because people don't really understand,
right.
And there's not a good biblical understanding of what it means to fulfill your role the way that God had intended for it to be. And it has been so skewed over time, and it has been so misunderstood. And I feel like that people shy away from it, or don't want to talk about it, or don't want to fulfill their role the way that God intended because they don't understand it.
Yeah.
It's been a little bit frustrating, like I said, to talk to kind of maybe this upcoming generation of girls, ladies, about this, because there's such a misunderstanding. It's almost like you have to start completely from scratch. And I would consider myself to be a pretty, strong, independent woman.
Independent woman. Yes.
We have a daughter that is the same. Well, I could say 2 daughters are the same, both of them. But our older daughter, I have been kind of having a lot of conversations because she's getting older and she's looking at her future and she's looking at her life, and she's made comments to me about, I don't know that I could ever be married because I don't know that I could be like this in a marriage. And I always point her back to, like, have you ever seen me be a doormat? Have you ever seen me get walked all over? Have you ever seen? And she always says no, but she has maybe a thought in her mind, or an idea in her mind that that's what it's going to be like for her.
Right.
And that she cannot live in a home like that. And so I've told her before, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And I always tell her, you can be a strong, independent woman and still fulfill your role in your marriage the way that God intended for you to do. And she says, yes, Mom, I've seen you do that, but I don't think I can do that.
Right.
And I'm encouraging her in that, because I feel like there is such a misconception that women cannot be outspoken, women cannot be strong, women cannot be independent and still be married the way that they're supposed to be married.
Yep.
And I think there's this idea of Christian women who are weak, who don't ever speak up, who don't ever say anything, who let themselves get walked all over. And same, for a man. I think there's this concept of Christian men, when you're actually, the leader of the home, that you do that. You walk all over your family, you yell at everyone all the time, you bark orders, everyone caters to you. And I'm not sure that that's what, I know that that's not how God has intended for it to be when he is talking about roles, biblical roles in marriage.
No, it's exactly right. It's about order, and people within the relationship, in that relationship, knowing where they fit. And it's so much about working together, and yet the conversation about roles has been framed as dominance and submission. And submission is a word we use because the Bible talks about that, but it has a very specific meaning and a very specific implication. None of this is about dominance or any of those things. It's about who is responsible for what happens. And we're going to talk about selflessness here in a second. But who's responsible ultimately? At the end of the day, someone has to be responsible. Well, the way God has designed it is that the husband, the man, would be responsible. A lot of this goes back to what we might call feminization of men, and just a lot of other issues that we're dealing with in our culture related to men and masculinity. But then on the other side, women saying, I'm not going to be abused. I'm not going to be manipulated or run over and those kind of things. That's not a happy marriage. But that's not God's intent either. A happy marriage is when the people in that relationship are fulfilling the roles that God gave to them and doing so happily because, number one, they're following the right standard and they're doing what the creator, the designer of this relationship has told them to do. And when we function the way God wants us to function, things work and they work well. And it can be a wonderful thing. It really can. Now we're human and we have our own will and our own emotions and all of those things. But we have to come back to, I have a job to do. God has given me this responsibility, and I'm going to fulfill that responsibility. And I think that's extremely important to understand.
Mm-hmm. I think along with fulfilling your roles is, as the wife and then as the husband, is allowing the other person to not change, allowing them to be the person that they are. Everyone has a personality, everyone has a way that they do things, and that's something I honestly have appreciated about you being married to me, because I know I'm not the easiest person to be married to
so
all the
easy.
time,
No, it's always
is
easy.
that you have
It's
allowed
always
me
easy.
to be the person that I am and continue to be that person with, quirkiness and weird, things. And I feel like that is really, really important, is in honoring the other person and not making them change or not forcing them to be someone they're not. And I think that's really, really important when you're looking at the roles in marriage, because the role is gonna look the same, but the way that maybe it's fulfilled is going to be different because of personalities and all those kinds of things. And so I think that's really, really important to remember, is that when you are married, or when you're going to be getting married to someone, that it is to the person that is going to honor you and continue to just let you be who you are. And I feel like that's really, really important. And when, like you were saying, that's not a happy situation when you're feeling like your personality is squashed, or that you're not able to express yourself the way that you would like to, or the way that you were created to, whatever. So I think that's really, really important, is just honoring the natural, maybe the personality of the person, is kind of what I'm trying to say.
And a marriage relationship should be over a lifetime, and we're going to change over the course of our lives. It could be for just age and maturity reasons. It could be for health reasons. It could be for stage of life, finances, children, all those things. They change, how we act and how we interact. And so, it's very important to say, this is who I am. This is who you are. We need to move forward together in that. And understanding roles puts us in a place where we can do that. We can value and lift up each other's, set of random personalities and thoughts and the rest. And it's okay, because it does not change what we together collectively can accomplish. And that takes us to the next thing. So it's, this all works together. The next thing is this. It's understanding, how do I have a happy marriage? Well, you have to have the right standard. You need to understand and operate within the appropriate roles. And then the next one is very important. You need to understand, a lot of understanding. You need to understand that this marriage relationship is not about me. It's about the other person. We make statements like that often when we're talking, but that's what so much of this comes down to. And we look at roles. My role as a husband is to be responsible, and there are a lot of things that fall under that. But I do that not to get my wife or my kids, not to get my family to do what I want them to do. I'm in a position where I need to leverage what I have for their benefit. And again, we could talk a lot about that, but it's not about me. It's about them. When we consider this idea of happiness, so often we lack happiness because we look at them and say, well, they're not doing what I need them to do to make me happy. When really happiness is found in serving, using what you have for the benefit of others. Every intimate relationship starts off selfish, every single one. I mean, that's what attraction is. Every single one starts off selfish. But maturity in that relationship, and hopefully before you get married or very soon after, there needs to be a transition from, will this person make me happy, to, can I make that person happy? That's the transition that needs to take place. Clearly, the person you're married to should make you happy. You should like to look at them and spend time with them, and all of the things that attracted you to them in the first place, those things should be there. But the overarching motivation of your relationship should be, what can I do to make them happy?
There's a word that the Bible uses when it's talking about the wife, and it uses that word helpmeet. And going back to maybe misunderstandings, misinterpretation, I feel like that word, and I kind of feel like I've heard it a lot here in the last couple of years, misused. And that really, really bothers me. And that word "help me" really is when it's talking about, when God created the woman, when He created first woman Eve, for Adam, and I will make a helpmeet for him. Basically saying I will make a helper suitable for him.
Right.
And I've heard women talk about this word helper as one of the things that as a wife we are to be our husband's helper, and almost talking about it in the context of my husband is such an idiot that I have to help him with these things. So that means I have to nag him.
There are a lot of idiots
I
out
have
there.
to tell him what to do. I have to help him do what I want him to do.
Right.
And that's completely selfish. That's completely not talking about this the way that you're saying. It's a completely selfless thing. So as a wife, the way that I look at it, to be my husband's helper means that I should do everything I can to help him be what he's supposed to be. So I should do everything I can do at home with the kids for you so that you can do what you're supposed to do, and so that you can fulfill your role as best as you can do it. So it's not about me. It kind of changes the perspective a little bit from he's such an idiot to he's so amazing that I need to help him be able to do all those amazing things that God has in store for him, that God has planned for him, and that God has for our family. And so if I don't do this part of being the helper the way that I'm supposed to, then maybe he can't be, maybe that's going to make it so that he's not going to be able to do everything that he can do.
Right.
Or it will discourage him from constantly nagging him about things that he's not doing. Or there's so many things that we can maybe not do the way we're supposed to as it comes to our role as a wife that is so selfish. And so when we're talking about a selfless marriage and that being about the other person, that's just kind of one of the things. I feel like it's making it so that the other person can be exactly what God wants them to be, and it's fulfilling our role in such a way that it the Bible says iron sharpens iron when it's talking about friends, and I kind of look at it that way too, that we're kind of sharpening each other and we're making each other better rather than tearing each other down. And when we're looking at marriage being that way, that it's about the other person, not what they can do for us, but what we can do for them, so that they can be what they're supposed to be in that relationship. Yeah,
that's great. The great example given to us in the Bible is in Ephesians chapter 5, where the instruction is to husbands, but it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. That's the standard. And, elevating the marriage standard to the example of Jesus is crazy. And when you go to, there's a lot of places, but you go to Philippians chapter 2, and it describes what Jesus did for us. He is God. He knew he was God. There was never a question about him being God. But even with that understanding, he humbled himself and became obedient to death. Why did Jesus die on the cross for us? Not for his own benefit. He did it for our benefit. He did it because we needed him to. And that's the example in Ephesians that is given to husbands, and really that's the example for marriage, is the way you interact with each other, the way you treat each other, the way you see and value each other should be the same way that Jesus Christ has done those things for you. It's sacrificial. It's not about you. We've talked about love in the past. Love is not an emotion. It's not how I feel. Love is doing what's best for the object of your love. That's what marriage is. It's how can I best serve my spouse, serve my family, and serve this relationship that God allows me to function in. And I know not everyone sees it that way. That's fine. But when you go back to the correct standard, the one given to us by our Creator, in the book, the manual, it says this relationship, it's not about you, it's about the other person. That changes how you feel about them. It changes your definition of so many of these things we conjure up to make us feel bad. It changes it. I'm happy when I can serve my wife in a way that makes her happy. And that, again, changes how you interact with one another.
It makes such a huge difference. And, if you're ever having a bad day and you're so it's all about, you're thinking just about how horrible you are feeling. There's nothing better in that moment than to think about, the other person. Well, if I'm feeling this bad, if I'm having a bad day, what can I do to help this other person? Because maybe they're having a bad day too, or it encourages you when you're encouraging someone else.
Right.
And so I think that it changes everything.
It changes the whole conversation and your perspective on what is happy. The last thing, and we've talked for a while, but the last thing is, how do you have a happy marriage? We need to be committed to commitment. And I don't know another way to say it, but all of us, basically, most of us at least, have the same version of vows when we get married, till death do us part is in there somewhere, or forever, or whatever.
Like
Most of the time, marriage doesn't start off with will you stay married until you stop liking each other.
Yeah.
If it starts that way, it's not going to go well. But most of the time, a commitment is made for life. And yet somewhere in the back of our minds, there's this back door that if this, then I can get out. Mm-hmm. Well, you will never be happy in a marriage or in any relationship, really, when you're constantly looking for the way out. If you're, one eye is always on how do I get out, or what's the trigger that's going to push me out the door, you're never going to be happy. You need to be committed to the longevity of that relationship. And when you are, sincerely committed to it, it takes so many other things off the table. And it takes a lot of fear off the table. It takes kind of that lack of security that we often feel. It takes that off the table. It causes you to have to work through difficulties. And, when you blow up with each other, you have an argument or a disagreement. If you're committed to that for the long term, you have to work through that. And being committed to commitment, again, it puts you in a place where you can enjoy a fruitful, happy relationship.
Yeah, and maybe also being committed to being commitment in such a way that you're not, for yourself, always looking for the back door, but maybe looking, what's this person going to do that will disappoint me, or
right.
Maybe in the future I will want to leave them, or also not looking just at what is the back door for you, but maybe what's the back door for the other person too. It could really, like you said, bring a lot of fear when you're always looking for a way out for yourself, but also wondering, when are they going to leave? Like,
right.
Are they not going to stay with me? Are they going to look for a way out? And constantly evaluating everything that the person is saying to you, or what
right.
they're doing, or why would they say that? Why would they do that? And so I think that just brings a lot of tension and a lot of fear into a relationship when both people are not committed to each other in that way and staying committed that way.
Yeah, being committed to the commitment, it shouldn't be just words that you say, or we'll see how it goes. Mm-hmm. It should be something you're committed to. And, good counseling and a good counselor can help in some very difficult situations. But in your heart, you need to be committed to that relationship. And that makes it, okay, the ground is now level, mm-hmm. and we can begin working from here.
Yeah.
Happy marriage, it's something that you can have, everyone can have. God did not create the institution of marriage or put people together so they would be miserable. He developed this, created this in such a way that we could have happy relationships. Now, I'll say this, we're not naive. We spend our lives talking to people who are really struggling in marriage. Perhaps you're not married yet. Be very careful about the person you are marrying. And make sure that you're marrying someone that understands the importance of the right standard and the other things that we talked about. It makes life so much easier. Even in the hard times, it makes life easier because you have something to go back to and a path that you can follow. Be very careful. Perhaps you're in a marriage that's not good. Maybe you're in a marriage where one person could care less about the right standard and you're trying to do the right thing. We talked about this several weeks ago on one of our shows, and how to be married in a relationship where one person is not a believer and the other person is. And really it comes down to, you can only control what you can control. The standard should be the standard for you. Pursue God, pursue being a godly person, and pray that God will use that in that relationship. Again, we talked at length about that. And then there are people who, frankly, they're not Christian people. They don't necessarily believe that the Bible is the standard, but they have good relationships, and I can acknowledge that as well. What's interesting about truth and God's plan is that even if you don't know you're following it, if you're following it, it will work. And people are funny. They're all wired different, and there are people who will get married and they just have a different personality about them. They're more caring or more selfless or whatever. There are some natural qualities that are more conducive to a marriage relationship than others. But they are the exception. Mm-hmm. They're the exception. They're not the rule. So don't base your life or your decisions on the exception. Base it on the rule, base it on the standard given to us by God, and you can experience a happy marriage. If you're in a marriage that's not happy right now, but you're both committed to getting there, get with a pastor, get with a good Christian counselor, and get back to this, because this is how you move forward in that. and get to the place where God can truly use your relationship, not just to make you happy, but use it to be a benefit and a blessing to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think being a blessing to other people and with your relationship can be such a help, like you said, to other people who are struggling, having a difficult time, people who are looking at marriage, who are dating, engaged, getting ready to be married. Just sharing those principles with them and you being the people that you're supposed to be in your marriage can really be such a help and encouragement to the people around you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I hope that's a help to you. This is a big conversation. It's one one question a lot of people ask, though, is it even possible to have a happy marriage? It is, but you can't have it apart from the design that the designer God gave to you. And I hope that's a help and encouragement. Thank you again for watching. If you're on YouTube, you probably are. Maybe you're somewhere else. But if you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, leave us a comment, ask us a question, and we'd love to interact with you there, and that would be great. Thank you. We will see you next time.